Greetings, everybody. Once again, welcome to another edition of TEDCO Talks. And my name is Troy Lamel Stovall. I am the CEO and Executive Director for TEDCO. And today I couldn't be more excited to have this conversation with Don Fry with the Greater Baltimore Committee. Don, thanks for taking some time to talk to us today.
Troy, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Cool. So, first of all, let me congratulate you on the Boy Scout Award. I was a Cub Scout years ago. You want to tell us a little bit about the Boy Scout Award?
Well, I was very pleased to be recognized by Boy Scouts of America for their Henry Rosenberg Distinguished Citizen Award of the Year. I also, unfortunately, did not make it to an Eagle Scout or even if I was a Cub Scout like you, but I was pleased to be recognized for, I guess, the work I've done over the years, and it's quite an honor when you look at the list of people who previously have been recognized from the business and political world. So I was very excited to be recognized for that. And now my next responsibility will be to serve as the chair of the next year's event. So we'll be moving in that direction soon.
No good deed. No good deed.
Well, Boy Scouts do great work, and now, of course, recognize both boys and girls, and certainly all the work that they do. And of course, there's probably no better time when you think about the Scout Oath that you sort of hope that people in all fields will follow those levels of civility that we need in the world today.
Man, we could spend all day on just that one, but we will avoid that one. Why don't you tell folks just a little bit about Don and kind of how you got to this position, but even more important, the Greater Baltimore Committee. Folks may not know that are listening to about the Greater Baltimore Committee and the great work it does for Baltimore.
Sure, we'll talk a little bit about. I grew up in Harford County, live in Harford County now. Also went to public schools, Harford County, went to Frostburg State College at that time, now Frostburg State University, where I had played football as well as was majored in political science and had a minor in business administration. I sort of have a unique connection there, and the fact not only was I captain of the football team, was also president of student government at the same time.
A jock that could actually, do the more just to be a jock, huh?
It probably wouldn't have happened at a bigger school, but I was fortunate to be able to do that, so it worked out very well for me there. I then ended up going to University of Baltimore School of Law, and then practiced law for about 19 years. And part of that, during that tenure, I was fortunate enough, was very active in politics. I was fortunate to be elected and served in the Maryland General Assembly in the 1990s. And when the political world came to an end, I didn't need a job. My law practice was going fine, but I really liked to do public policy and things of that nature. That sort of what got my juices flowing. So I looked around just said to people, I don't need a job, but if there's opportunities, let me know. And I was very fortunate to be offered an opportunity to come to the Greater Baltimore Committee as Executive Vice President and General Counsel. I served in that role for a couple of years from 1999 to 2002. And then November 1st, 2002, I became President and CEO and have been in that role ever since. Greater Baltimore Committee is a tremendous organization, one that I actually grew to respect when I was in the legislature. And the reason I liked it from the legislative perspective is that Greater Baltimore Committee was never an organization that came down and just said no to you. No, I don't like this idea. No, you can't do that. They oftentimes would come down and say, we understand your concern. We see that you as a legislator think there's a problem. We're not sure that the way that you're looking to address it is the best way for business to move forward. But let's see if we can find a way to accomplish what you want to do, but also make sure it doesn't negatively affect on business. As a legislator, that is worth gold because you're there for 90 days and you don't necessarily know everything, and the time is compressed. So to have somebody who wants to help you find a solution, that's important. And then that's what the GBC is all about, being a problem-solving organization. Its mission, which it came into effect in 1955 is when it was formed. And it's a business organization, business advocacy, economic growth organization. And the mission is to bring the corporate and civic community together to find solutions to problems that affect the region's competitiveness and viability. So what do we need to do to make this region, being Harford, Baltimore, Howard, Anne Arundel, Carroll, and Baltimore City, an area that's better to do business, a better a place where businesses want to grow. So that's really the nut and bolts about what the GBC is all about, is how do we make this a better business climate and make us more competitive for job creation opportunities.
And particularly, and we'll talk obviously more about COVID here, but talk about some of the recent successes you've had, even in light of COVID.
Yeah, well, I think some of the things that we've done most recently is we released a regional workforce development report. What our board of directors basically said is, let's look at what the industry sectors are that are destined to grow over the next 7 to 10 years. And in doing so, let's see where we are currently in those specific industry sectors. And then let's see, what do we need to do to be fully prepared, whether it be from a changing the curriculum or changing training and things like that. So we've looked at various sectors. Obviously, information technology is one of those major sectors that we're going to see growth in the next couple of years. Another is construction and building. Another is healthcare, and then another deals with business services. Now, technology is always a part of all of those areas, but specifically looking at IT by itself is important. So those are the 4 industry sectors we've identified. You're going to see growth in the next 10 years. What do we need to do to make sure that we're not looking back 10 years from now and saying, God, if we had seen this coming, this is what we would have done. So we've laid out a series of recommendations. And now what our Education and Workforce Committee is doing is trying to work with workforce providers, work with employers, and try and work with other higher education, even K through 12, to make sure that we're embracing and implementing all those recommendations moving forward.
Well, that's critical, right? Particularly from where I sit as the investor, it does us no good to invest in the next great idea or whatever that technology is, and then there's nobody to do it. There is nobody to make it happen, and you can't have growth. And so there is a symbiotic relationship between what we do here at TEDCO and what you just talked about. And
I think we get so caught up in the work of the day and work of what we're reacting to that sometimes we never take a chance to pause and say where we want to be in the future and what's going to take to be like that in the future. So I think that's one of the best, the beauties about this particular report. It gives all of us, and again, these are not recommendations that the GBC can embrace by themselves. It's going to take a lot of collaboration and cooperation with many other entities like TEDCO to make sure that we can meet all of these objectives moving forward. And if we do so, although I may not be here 10 years from now, but 10 years from now, somebody's going to look back and say, hey, thank God that somebody took the initiative to find out what the needs are, and at least we've addressed as many as we could so that we are a region that's moving forward in these areas.
That's outstanding. Baltimore doesn't always get the publicity, the positive publicity, because of a number of things that are real, but things that sometimes get overplayed. And how do you talk to people about what you just talked about, the role that the GBC plays in terms of making it a better place, not just Baltimore, but the region, I get that, but Baltimore specifically, and how do you make sure that people see a different Baltimore than sometimes gets portrayed?
Well, first of all, let me say that when the GBC was first created in 1955, it was strictly Baltimore City. And the focus, and that of course was because in 1955, Baltimore City had 950,000 residents, whereas Howard County probably had 30,000 residents. Obviously, things have changed over time, and the GBC became more of a regional organization in the late 70s, early 80s, because one of the things that they realized is that regions rather than individual jurisdictions were driving the economy. That's what was driving the economy. And we do a state of the region report every couple of years where we look at about 100 different indices and compare our region compared to others around the country. And we find that regions that do well have a strong central core. So it's important for Baltimore City to also do well, that's going to help everybody in this region do well and prosper as well, likely. What I tell people about Baltimore City is, first of all, there are some incredible strengths about Baltimore City that people don't recognize. One, first of all, is just the diversity of its citizens, the diversity of its communities. I mean, Baltimore City is a community, as a city that has over 200 or more neighborhoods, and each one has its own little great attributes that people sometimes don't recognize. The other part of it is when you look at the strength of the city, you see obviously all the business activity that occurs here, but also when you think about the fact of what other city can we think of in the country, not many, that have two incredible medical research institutions.
Exactly.
City. Johns Hopkins on the east side, University of Maryland, Baltimore on the west side. Most cities would die to have that type of medical research institutions that are accessible to them. Also, when you look at Baltimore from just location, where it's located along the 95 corridor, its proximity obviously to the airport, obviously to the railroads, just a tremendous location for businesses and people to want to locate and be in as a part of. And then also, I talked about the medical research institutions, just also think about the higher education institutions that exist in Baltimore and the surrounding area. We clearly are a college town when you think about even Charles Street, from Towson University down to Notre Dame, to Loyola, to Johns Hopkins, down to the city Oregon and to Coppin. I mean, you don't, and then we throw the community colleges on top of that. We just have an incredible opportunity, and that's one of the strengths of this region is the quality of the workforce that we have as well.
No, I love the way you described it. And I think you're right. People don't recognize the number of higher education institutions just on the 4-year side, but then you throw on the 2 years that exists in Baltimore. There's very few.
Going off Charles Street, I left out Stevenson. So we get Stevenson as well. So I mean, there may be others. I mean, that just gives you an idea of the dynamic that's out there. And then if you go out into the county as well, you got UMBC and on the south side of Baltimore, of the city. So it's just, when you think about it, you can plot it on maps, but there aren't too many other cities or regions that have that sort of wealth of higher education, of educated people, which gives us a great opportunity to bring them into our businesses.
Outstanding. I was talking to someone else about, particularly with because of COVID and so much online shopping, the logistics piece, the logistics industry there in Baltimore is really, really picked up and create a lot of energy around that. You want to talk about that?
No, Trade Point Atlantic, over the former Bethlehem Steel property that's being turned into basically a logistics center. It's going to be incredible. They already employ 8,000 people now, and they've only been really moving for the last 2 years, probably, as far as operationally. At one time, they talked about having a maximum of 15,000 people. I think they're going to far exceed 15,000 people employed in that area. Then you've got Port Covington, which is another major employment hub that's about to break ground and get some movement going with its infrastructure. And then, of course, we've just got we talked about logistics. You've got the Port of Baltimore that brings in incredible amount of supplies from around the world. And of course, you've got all of the distribution of that, where that's why we're the furthest inland port on the east coast, and that can get out to places as far out to the Midwest, to Chicago, easily within a day, and just supplies and things of that nature. So we have a great opportunity to do that. You don't see that very often. The one thing that I think we struggle with and we have to work on is the fact that we don't have, and it's a major priority of the GBC, is to look at how we can make sure that we have connections to get people to these new jobs, get people to Trade Point Atlantic, get people to Port Covington. If these are going to be the economic hubs, we need to make sure that we have access to those employment stations.
Transportation, adequate transportation.
Transportation mobility is a key priority for any successful business operation.
So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. So you're a football player, so we're gonna do a little halftime, go in the locker room and stretch and talk to the coach. So have a little fun here a little bit. So tell us a little bit, Don, during this COVID time, kind of what's been kind of one of your favorite, an activity that you do to kind of break the monotony of what we've been doing through this COVID era?
Well, I'll tell you, there's been so much activities just to get things moving around and make sure we operate and pivot. But when I think of what I do personally outside of the office, there's a couple of things that I'm interested in. I'm a pretty avid golfer. My family is a golfing family. I'm the third best golfer in a family of 3. My son is a professional golfer in Florida who's trying to make it on the tour, playing in the mini tours, developmental tours in there. My wife is a very avid golfer. She's been a two-time champion as a senior woman. She's played in the U.S. Senior women, U.S. amateurs, all kinds of different activities, and is very good. And then I'm the third one.
And then you.
Yeah. My wife has, I think, 12 or 13 hole-in-ones. My son has 3, and I've got 2. So I can't even keep up with pace with that. But so golf is obviously a key. I love all sports activities. Of course, can't really go to any sporting activities, but I frequently would be attending as many sporting activities. But I'm also a pretty avid reader, and I still do that during the COVID crisis as much as anything else. My reading is more in the area of political biographies or leadership areas. I particularly like more of the colonial revolutionary time and our founding fathers. Although most recently, I read a book dealing more recently about James Baker, who the man who ran Washington, which is a pretty fascinating story about all the connections he had, and somebody who actually, although he was clearly along the Republican Party lines, he was able to move back and forth between across the aisle between the parties, and had commanded respect from both political parties moving forward. So it was a pretty fascinating read.
That is. I got to go on the because I'm a history buff myself. So we could spend time on that. But tell me on the books, when you look back at that history, kind of an interesting historical moment from the founding fathers, you think is just one of those things that people don't know about that really caught your eye?
Well, I think it's funny. I was talking to somebody in here the other day. They asked me, how things are different, particularly when we saw what happened back on January 6th with the attack on the Capitol. Yeah, and people clearly have misperceptions about how government operates and how it should be. I think the part that I find fascinating is that if we were involved in a true revolution and trying to figure out how do we create a form of government, you look back at the Federalist Papers, and you see how people used to read through the Federalist Papers and argue about what sort of government we should have, and you see both sides of it. And that, unfortunately, in this day and age, if we had to go read through nobody would read through the Federalist Papers.
Absolutely.
We seem to be too much driven by 30-second sound bites and bumper sticker slogans, rather than really getting into what makes the foundation of a democracy or a representative democracy. And I think that that's a very unfortunate situation. We really need to have people who are much more knowledgeable about government, about the structure of government. And even is discouraging to me when I see some of the results that come out of high school testing of how few high school students really even understand how the government operates or know who their elected officials are. And I think that that's just a sad commentary on what we have going on today.
Yeah, it's funny. Again, we spend so much time on, I think, our technology has given us so many wonderful things, but it's sped things up and it's made everything want to be so instant, right? My wife and I were in the store shopping the other day and she saw some Jiffy Pop popcorn, Jiffy Pop popcorn. I said, yeah, we thought this was fast, the old Jiffy Pop. But everything now is microwavable. Everything is the 30-second soundbite. Everything is you can get your news in 30 minutes. The 6 o'clock news doesn't mean anything because we all get the text alerts through the day. Right. And by the time 6 o'clock news comes around, it's old news, right? Yeah. And so you're right. The ability to consume and spend time into something, I think, has been one of the human downfalls of all the technology that we have.
Yeah, well, and you walk in and you walk into your kitchen and you ask Alexa what the weather's going to be or something like that, and you get the information right off the bat. It's just again, everything is so compressed from a time constraint perspective. We're always looking for that instant gratification, that instant information, and not that that's benefited us in many, many ways. But at the same time, I think, unfortunately, when we look at some situations like really having a thorough knowledge and understanding of the intricacies of government or even of business, sometimes that we're missing that, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, the shallowness. That's exactly right. Well, I started this so we're going back out on the field, team. We're going back out on the field. So halftime's over. So let's talk about COVID. That is obviously the
Sure.
elephant in the room. It's not even the elephant anymore. It is the room more than anything.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how the Greater Baltimore, but two things. One is how Don you told us kind of what you've been doing with your golf and what you do in person, but how has your leadership change and your management change because of COVID? And then also how GBC has had to shift their activities because of COVID?
Let me talk first about GBC and how we've had to shift. Obviously, we've gone to almost an entirely virtual platform with anything, whether it be board meetings, committee meetings that we have, all the events that we have. Everything has gone virtual. The last, I guess, in-person quote event that we held was about a year ago, and we had a legislative program in late January.
Wow.
We actually have our legislative program on this coming week, and it's going to be virtual. So that's entirely changed throughout the entire process. And obviously many people are working from home. Some come into the office on a regular basis. So we've had to figure out ways of making sure just we continue to get the work done. So part of it is just communications back and forth. Obviously a lot more email communications back and forth moving forward. I think the one benefit that we've had, I think it's forced us to do things quicker than I wanted us to do. For example, I've been talking with our staff about wanting to have committee meetings where people could come in person or people couldn't possibly be online to do it. We weren't moving as quickly as I would have liked to possibly have seen us do that. Some reasons just we weren't sure we had the technology. Well, COVID sort of forced us to do that, and we pivoted pretty quickly and made that happen. From a management perspective or a leadership perspective, I don't know that things changed entirely too much from my perspective. I sort of look at a situation, evaluate what the problem is, assess what needs to be done, and then identify who the right person is in the office that can probably handle that area. When I meet with that person or talk to that person, I lay out to them what I think the outcome is that we'd like to see, but not necessarily predetermine what the outcome is, but sort of the direction I'd like to see us head and some of the areas I think would make some success. And then have that person regularly report back and give me information about how things are going and give feedback. I mean, I think that's most of a leader's responsibility is to identify the issues, identify the problem, identify the person who can carry out and implement what needs to be done, and then you sort of provide them with guidance and direction and assistance as time comes on to take them to the goal line, since we're talking about the football metaphors, and get us across the goal line. That's not a whole lot different than if you're in person, but I do think it takes a little bit more involvement in a virtual world.
No, I think that's right. I think for folks that are listening, I think that's part of what I heard you say, and you can correct me, is that there are just some elemental things about how we should manage our teams that stayed the same. Now we may have to be a little bit more intentional on one or two other ones, but there are just certain elemental things that had to stay the same.
Yeah, I don't think COVID has changed management structure or leadership structure, but except for the fact of maybe just more different types of communication, different types of updates that you need, because you're not walking down the hallway and running across somebody and just saying, hey, I'm looking to do this. You may not talk to that person that particular day or a couple of days or something like that, unless it's just through email. And sometimes, as you know, email communications, I don't think are as clear as face-to-face communications are. So you got to be careful in how you translate back and forth through emails as well, because sometimes the person, what they're asking you to give feedback on, or the feedback you're giving, is not always entirely what would have been there if you were face-to-face.
No, I say all the time, Don, that email is actually one of the worst forms of communication, because I could send you an email with no ill intent, but depending on how you've had your day, or I may say a trigger word in my email that just will set you off, right? And you're right. Picking up the phone, the old-fashioned, just picking up a phone, or we can't go down the hall anymore. Picking up a phone still is one of the most effective forms of communication to me.
Yeah, look, and Not that I don't enjoy doing Zoom and love doing this with you, Troy, but at the same time, I sometimes during the day, I'm like, somebody will send me an email and say, hey, can you jump on a Zoom at 4:30? I'm like, hey, can't you just pick up the phone and call me? Uh, so I think sometimes it might just be easier that way because you're doing this so often that it's good just to go back to the normal way periodically.
Amen on that, man. Earlier you mentioned about diversity of there in the Baltimore region. Let's talk a little bit about that, because obviously one of the things that COVID did expose was kind of some of the divides that exist within our country around gender and race. So talk about some of the efforts. I know you and I've talked about some of the efforts that GBC is looking at to try to have both the conversation and how to address some of these challenges.
Yeah, I think racial equity and social justice has certainly emerged as a very important issue for businesses and for individuals and society as a whole. I can't think of hardly any organization or person who is not giving some direct attention to racial equity and social justice these days. And it's very appropriate that we do so. It's long overdue that we do so. So some of the things that we're doing is, first of all, we're looking internally. Looking at our internal operations to look at our bylaws, look at our mission statement, look at our rules of how we operate processes, procedures internally as far as purchasing and things of that nature, to make sure that we're providing all of the opportunities that should be afforded to everyone in working with the GBC. Also, some of the things that we're working on is looking at it, and that even involves from our committee involvement. Exactly, are we taking up issues that are important from a racial equity, social justice perspective? I also think that we need to be looking at things externally as well. And I say externally, one is that when we do our public policy and looking at bills and pieces of legislation, we're looking at things through an equity lens to make sure that we're really looking at that, which not only that we didn't do that before, but now we're definitely making sure that everything we look at does have some perspective with it from an equity lens moving forward. And then also, I think that you're going to see coming out of the GBC a series of programs, a series of activities to help educate, to help involve people about what we need to do in the business world to make sure that all of our businesses are embracing equity within the office place. I'm not suggesting that the GBC is the one who knows all the answers. In fact, we're late in the game compared to many other organizations that are out there. But the GBC is the type of organization that can be a facilitator to bring people together, talk about issues, and also help particularly small and minority businesses that don't necessarily have the resources or the resource capacity to make changes or learn best practices, but you can help engage people in those discussions and connect larger businesses with smaller businesses or minority businesses so they can work together to find ways to embrace those types of ideas. But I think it's a critically important time. I think we're seeing it at the national level with the Biden administration now. Just recently, Speaker Adrian Jones has introduced a very dynamic, what she's calling or being referred to as a quote Black agenda, dealing with home ownership, health care disparities, job opportunities, things of that nature. The Senate President, Melanie Griffith, the Speaker, the President Pro Tem, issued a report. I think TEDCO is obviously engaged in a number of some of those items that are being embraced. So this is the time for all of us to really grab a hold of this issue and really make some transformational changes that need to be made.
No, I love all of that, and yes, we are involved with. We appreciate the support from Speaker Jones and Senator Griffith in both of their bills and the recommendations, respectively, out of both of their chambers. Yes, we're being more intentional. You and I talked, and we can say here we plan on launching here. We hope we'll do it with the Greater Baltimore Committee and others. Our efforts to focus on Baltimore. To launch some very specific efforts that really look at how do we invest more in Baltimore, invest more in women and Black and Brown owned businesses. And so there has to be, to your point, you're making intentionality. We have to be, you can't just want it, you got to be specific and intentional about getting it done.
And I think that may be what's different. I mean, look, we've had debates about racial equity and social justice for 50 years at least. And but I think this time there is that more intentionality, and I think people, there's like that tipping point that people say, this is the time, this is the, sometimes you have to be in the right place at the right time, and sometimes you have to know you're in the right place at the right time. And I think if people know that we're in the right place and the right time, and people want to see this happen.
You mentioned, as we close, you mentioned about, maybe in 10 years, kind of what the workforce study would lead to and the other work that the GBC is doing. But what's that vision for you for what does Baltimore look, what does the greater Baltimore area look like in 10 years? What's that look like for you?
Well, I think over time, you're going to see the greater Baltimore region still being a very strong populated area. Obviously, we're about 2.6 million people right now. I think obviously you're going to see that grow. And it used to be only had one economic engine in the state, and that was the Baltimore region. Now I think there's two equal economic engines. You got the Baltimore region, and then you have the Washington suburban region, and there's a connection between the two. And I think that's one thing that's going to change over the next 10 years. You're going to continue to see a growing connectivity between the Baltimore and Washington area as we move forward. Some people, and I've said that sometimes, and people sort of balk at me, like, because they get a little bit parochial and worry about just the Baltimore area. And I'm saying, look, there's only one nation's capital. And what's wrong with having your connection with the nation's capital? And we can still root for the Ravens here, and they can still root for the Washington football team, and we can still both have our
which plays in Maryland, but that's a separate conversation.
And we can still have our separate baseball teams and root for those as well. But the reality is that the economy doesn't necessarily see those artificial lines
exactly right.
That are out there. So I see the greater Baltimore region becoming a major part of the economy because of the connectivity to the Washington area. I see still a very vibrant region, particularly with young people, young professionals, and very highly educated young professionals, because I think this is an area that people are attracted to. They see the attributes, they see things like the beauty of the Inner Harbor, the Chesapeake Bay, they see the tourism and the cultural activities that occur in downtown Baltimore and throughout the region. And that's what people are attracted to. So I think that you're going to continue to see people embrace that area. We have some challenges that have to be addressed to make sure that this remains that vibrant area. We need to continue to improve our, particularly in Baltimore City, the K through 12 education system. We need to continue to grow our transportation and make sure that we are connecting transportation opportunities to people of all communities. It's one of the challenges in Baltimore City, and that probably only 35% of the workforce has cars. That's different than some of the surrounding jurisdictions. So how do we address that? So I think you're just going to continue to see this as a new economy area. I think you're going to start seeing more technology companies, more new economy, things that we're not even imagining right now as being a part of the economy. And I think that that's very exciting and encouraging for all of us who are here today and looking 10 years out.
Well, that's great, man. This is a great way to close. And I didn't say this at the beginning, but we're taping this the Friday after the inauguration of a new administration here in this country. And not to make this political, it's not meant to be a political forum, but inaugurations always usher in the newness of them, the hope, the hope. And I talk a lot about hope here at TEDCO, and I think we're all kind of hoping for a better and a different day going forward.
I agree with you, and I think this has been a great week. I think, again, there's this, I talked about a turning point or tipping point. I think the inauguration for a lot of people just put us in a different direction, and positive direction and hope, as you referred. So I'm looking forward to not that things are going to be easy, but we can at least debate discussions and have civility, which is very important these days.
Which is the key. And that's the point. One of the things that as we close, I talked to folks, and I heard in one of the songs that they talked about is, find a way to walk in somebody else's shoes. If I get to know Don and Don's journey a little bit better, I still can disagree with Don, but I can at least respect and understand how he came to the conclusion and why he has the viewpoint that he does.
Yeah, and that's the one thing that's changed, I think, in politics, even from my days. I mean, there were a group of people when I was in Annapolis who sort of, both parties who really could make a difference and move a direction of policy one way or the other, and we maybe on different sides of the aisle. Today, you see too much of that polarization. I'm hopeful that things will change. I'm hopeful that this administration can still have that debate, still have that discussion, and that really brings out a better product. It's just, can we all get on the same page at the end?
Amen. Well, Don, thank you for your time today. I truly appreciate it and learned a lot. And I look forward to, more importantly, working with GBC in the future and having some great times together.
Great. Well, I think there's great opportunities for GBC and TEDCO to work together, and I look forward to doing that with you. And I know you're relatively new compared to me being on the job, but I look forward to that great relationship moving forward.
Thank you, sir. Well, again, thank you all for listening to TEDCO Talks. My name is Troy Lamel Stovall with TEDCO. See you guys next week. Take care. Thanks again, Don.
Thanks again.